great irony of most cooks is that we don't really know what we're doing. And to the extent that we can learn a little bit more about that or shed some light on our fairly vast ignorance, I think is a good thing.
Cooking is a lot of things, and one of the things that we discovered was that cooking is a science. There's certainly some biology, there's certainly some physics, there's an awful lot of chemistry at play all the time when you're cooking. But again, we are not scientists, not trained scientists, so we realized that we were going to have to go outside of our own industry to seek out answers to some of the questions, to the myriad of questions that we have. Again, it's sort of a trick or a secret that we have over all of you diners, and that you come to our restaurants and we make delicious food, but we really don't know what we're doing. We have no idea what we're doing. We don't know why we're doing what we do. You know, the traditional answers have always been, when you ask, well, why do we do it this way? Well, because that's the way we've always done it, or that's the way that it works. Or my favorite one, with a very thick French accent, because I told you to do it that way. And again, that's useful to a point, but there's not a real sort of transfer of information. And so we wanted to find out what was going on. We didn't really understand what was happening. We realized we had to go outside our industry, and so that's what we did. We began to read, we began to revisit books like on food and cooking. We began to reach out to other chefs that were equally curious. And ultimately, we're fortunate enough to meet people like some of these great minds that are here and develop relationships with the scientific community that could begin to help us understand what was going on. Because, again, we are still to this day very ignorant about what's happening in the kitchen, but we know a little bit more than we did a few years ago, and we knew a little bit more back then. And you can sort of go backwards, and about 30 years ago, it's like the dark ages of cooking. We really did, nobody was asking any questions. We didn't really know anything. So one of the main reasons I opened WD-50, aside from creating a place where I could take your money and feed you, was to create a space where I could continue my culinary education, where my staff could continue their culinary education, and where you as a diner, if you so chose, could continue your culinary education. And we feel very fortunate that we've been able to establish these relationships, and through these relationships, we've begun to learn a little bit more about what's happening to our food as we process it. And we're taking that sort of constant stream of information, and we're applying our creativity to it at WD-50 and now at Alder, our new restaurant. And so in an effort not to take up too much time, what I'd like to show you quickly is a dish at WD-50. It's called aerated foie gras. And the idea was a mousse, a classic French preparation. It's basically trapping air in something, typically something very rich. And by the sheer act of trapping that air in it, you lighten it up and you make it not seem quite so decadent. Chocolate mousse, whipped cream, ice cream, lots of those things are foams or mousses. But the idea for us here was, how could we, using some very modern technology, walk the idea of a mousse down the road? How could we make a foie gras mousse that was different? Because part of the problem with a mousse is that it usually has a lot of stuff in it besides the main ingredient. If you're making a chocolate mousse, it's full of cream. And that's diluting the flavor. So what we wanted to do was to figure out if we could create a mousse of foie gras, or if we could aerate foie gras without adding or taking too much away from the flavor of the foie gras. So what we've done is we've taken a very traditional French terrine of foie gras, which I learned how to make almost 20 years ago, and we haven't done anything to it except we're melting it. We're going to add some very modern ingredients, some hydrocolloids, which are going to allow us to trap the air in there and manipulate the air into it. So we're going to use a little bit of agar, a little bit of konjac. And those ingredients have become sort of standard ingredients in many ways in the modern pantry of restaurants all over the world. And there's some processes that have to go through. You have to hydrate them, basically. You have to get them into solution. And so what we've done is we're taking this foie gras, and we actually have to break it because we have to get everything to a slightly higher temperature in order for these various gums to hydrate. So for a minute there, you saw something that didn't look terribly appetizing, which was hot foie gras, melted foie gras rendered out. But what we've done is we're re-emulsifying it back into a tiny bit of water with a little bit of an egg yolk added. Egg yolks, traditional great emulsifiers, lots of lecithin. And then we're going to take a bit of technology that we found on late night TV. These interesting, on the QVC channel, I came across these little tiny canisters, and what they do is they have a little valve on the top with a one-way valve. So normally when you put something in a vacuum chamber, you draw a vacuum on it, and it's going to rise, hopefully. It will rise up real quick, and that center of that little white lid has got a one-way valve, so air comes up, and normally when you would release the pressure on the vacuum chamber, the larger chamber, it would smash everything down. But because there's a one-way valve, the air can't push that foie gras down. So now we've taken the foie gras, it's ostensibly risen, we've allowed it to cool off, and then you can see what we've done is create a very modern type of mousse that we wouldn't normally have been able to do using some of the old-fashioned ideas and techniques and understanding. And we're going to garnish it, and we'll talk a little, this is where the taste of it comes in, balancing it. Foie gras has traditionally seen either something very sweet or something very tart to accompanying it. In this case, we've taken some mashad plums, which are delicious, very, very tart plum from Iran that we used to use, and we've hydrated them in some water, blended them up with a little bit of miso, which is very salty, and made a puree. And now we're taking just traditional roasted beets, and we're going to use a very modern piece of equipment, the vacuum chamber, to make a pickle instantly. This is, again, where we see science and technology finding its way into the kitchen. Vacuum chambers are very interesting because vegetables are full of air, and what happens is ostensibly when we put these pieces of roasted beet in a pickling liquid, which is in those containers, and put them back into the machine, the change in pressure opens up all the tiny little cells and allows the liquid to go inside. It's almost as if you open your mouth and someone pours a glass of water in it, and it sort of permeates you instantly. And what's great about this is that you can make a pickle in 35, 45 seconds. And that's not to say that we're turning our back on the old ways of making pickles, which might be to boil it, can it, et cetera, et cetera. These are just new ideas, new pieces of equipment, technology, and understanding that are adding to what we already know. We're not replacing our old knowledge, we're just adding to our new knowledge. And so, again, you can see here that the foie gras is now aerated. It's very light. It's a complete ripoff. You're paying for a tiny bit of foie gras. But it's really good for us, great for food costs. No, I'm just kidding, but it's nice. Again, you capture the essence of a mousse, because what's great about a mousse is you have something and sort of in your mouth, it collapses back down into that pure flavor, and all you're left is with this melt-in-your-mouth foie gras flavor. So you see there a little bit of the pickled beets, which beets are sweet, particularly once they've been roasted, a little bit tart and acidic once they've been pickled. The plum puree, which is also a bit tart with some salty miso added, and then the classic pairing of brioche and foie gras. We're honoring, in a way, the tradition. We bring some pieces of brioche there into it. And lastly, we use a green called Delfino, which is a member of the cilantro family, has a very interesting flavor, and that sort of rounds out the dish. So there are some very nice bitter, sweet, salty, umami flavors that find their way into the dish and make it what we hope to be a very balanced dish. So enough about me, and that's sort of a very brief, condensed example of the way we do things and the way science has helped us and allowed us to do things more efficiently and with a greater level of understanding. Again, we're taking this knowledge that these good people share with us, and we're applying our creativity to it and hopefully coming up with some fun things. So thank you very much.
I feel like you raised the bar by standing and doing that.
I'm sorry, I'm not good in chairs. I want to get up again, and I've been in here for a minute.
I sit home in a chair by myself and stare at a computer all the time. That's kind of my scene.
Have you ever been to a rodeo? I'm like the rodeo clown. So I don't know that I know a lot about the intersection of science and food, but I don't know, just pitch in where I can.
All right, so hi, I'm Peter Meehan, and I edit a magazine now, but back in the day, I used to write about restaurants. I used to review restaurants for the New York Times, and I thought when Dr. Roat so kindly asked me to come and do this, I would try to talk a little bit about the taste, the way that you put together the kind of taste that you have when you're writing about restaurants professionally. And I guess you know the basics of restaurant writing. You go and you I don't want to be too scientific here, but you eat with your mouth, and then you write something, and if people like it and agree with you, you get a job, and if you don't, then you go on Yelp. And and so that's pretty much all I've got. No, but there's a other than it being like a really great job that people are like, how did you get it? There really is like a how do you end up being a food critic? And though it is entirely luck that gets you a job like that, I think my story might relate to what we're going to talk about tonight, because when I moved to New York when I was 19, I didn't eat like fish or cheese or mushrooms, and I really didn't have any experience with cuisines outside of hamburgers and other ground meat dishes, which is what I was raised on. And but food became this interesting thing to me because I found that the people that my girlfriend, now wife, went to college with were from all over the world, so they'd take me to a Malaysian restaurant, and I would just be terrified because I wouldn't know what anything on the menu was. I didn't like stuff, and it became, but if I wanted to be friends with them, if I really wanted to connect with them, I needed to understand this food. I needed to understand how to order and how to behave and how to, at restaurants. So that was like kind of, and I was kind of a directionless loser at that point. So I seized onto food as the thing I was going to focus on. And this was like before food blogs, so I think it was still okay. And so I did a lot of eating during that time. And I guess that brings me to the first step in developing the taste to become a restaurant critic, which is eat. I was gonna go with exposure. I was trying to come up with some TED Talk structure to talk about this, but I thought that this was probably more direct. And I think it's one of those things that if you wanna hold up your, it seemed like a more exotic idea to me at the time, but I tried to just eat everything. Both in restaurants and going around the city and cooking at home. And the more I ate, the more I understood about food, and the more I could draw connections between one thing and another. And that was really important to me, starting to get the base of knowledge that I would need to write about restaurants. And I think eating everything includes, I just remember the first time I had to eat a guinea pig, and it came to the table, and I don't know if you've ever eaten cuy, but when you get one, it looks like a rat that's gone to hell, because it's just deep fried with a wide gaping mouth. And the place I ate it at had the weird they cut the hands off and sprinkled them around the rim of the plate like parsley, and it was terrible. But I think it's important to eat everything from basic stuff to weird stuff, because you start to make these mental points on a map of where flavors are in relation to each other. There's shiokara, the Japanese izakaya snack of fermented squid guts. It's kind of brown, and they serve it in a little ramekin. And the first time I had it, I remember being super duper repulsed by it. But then I need your help pronouncing this, surströmming. It's this fermented herring that comes in a can from Sweden, and they let the can, when the can starts to puff up, when there's that much botulism or something in there, then it's good to go. And that stuff was, I ate it with Harold McGee and Dave Arnold, who was and we had to take it to a park to open the can. And I mean, this was a New York City park with the stench of urine was part of the landscape, and there was just this ammonia cloud of pickled fish. So then once you've had that, then shiokara seems very, it's oh, it's a California roll, So making that mental map of flavors, I think, is really an important thing for then if you're going to end up trying to write about food critically. And we can go to the next slide. Oh, we're already there. Yeah, so I guess that's the other thing is you have to do repetition. It's not enough to eat the guinea pig once, because the day I ate the guinea pig, I went out to dinner with someone I'd never met, and she was Venezuelan, and she thought I was an idiot for eating Ecuadorian guinea pig, and apparently they had it all wrong. And so I ended up going through every Andean culture that made guinea pig and making sojourns to eat their guinea pig, because I thought, because this woman told me I was wrong about guinea pig, and after my 4th guinea pig eating experience, I accept that I might be wrong, but I knew that I had enough information to confidently say that I didn't think guinea pig tasted good. But that's, that's an important thing, because that's the difference between Wylie's connection to flavor, and his ideas about putting flavors together. They manifest themselves in a dish that he puts out and you get to eat. And you do things with flavor that I don't even understand. I saw her slides earlier, and they're way better than my slides. But when you're writing about it, then you have to have the points of reference to understand where people are going to come from, because inevitably someone is going to come up to you after you write something that you feel really confident about and tell you you're completely wrong. And for that not to be a shattering experience, and for you not to be an asshole who is completely wrong, I think you really need to do a lot of eating and a lot of critical eating and thinking about eating and reading about eating and home cooking for, because you can't always fly to Burma to eat the food, so you might have to make what is it, like the tea leaf salad at home, so you know what the range of acceptable astringency is. So when you go out to a restaurant and you're supposed to be judging that, you have a frame of reference for it. And I guess we could just go back to the burger at this point. But I guess that's the last thing. Is I talked to Jonathan Gold a couple weeks ago, who's like a total hero of mine, and he said he thought that adjectives were like a personal failing in writing about food, and I really like that. And I don't think that any or many of us could achieve the monkish kind of perfection that he doles out, but that use of concrete language and talking about flavor is really important from a critical perspective, because that's what taste is for a critic, is knowing what yours is and knowing how to communicate that. So hopefully when someone reads something you write, if you're lucky enough to write for an audience, they get a kind of a mental experience of what that food is you're describing, and then they get to apply their standards to that. So they're like, you read the cooey thing and you're like, that's a funny story, but I'm not going to eat the cooey. That's kind of the goal of food writing. Or maybe they're like, that sounds good. I want the deep fried rat in hell. All right, that's who I am and what I brought to talk about. Thank you.
It's amazing, the sense of taste. Everybody thinks they know about it, but in fact, there's very little known about it. And there's a lot of misconceptions, and so I often find it fun to talk to chefs and tell them about what is taste, what is flavor, and very frequently they're surprised. So as Amy was saying, I'm a psychologist, and so when I was in graduate school at McGill, I was really interested in trying to understand the role of the brain in producing motivated behaviors. And the motivated behavior that I chose was feeding, possibly because how I felt about chocolate. And so over the past 20 years, I've established a lab now at Yale. And our focus is trying to understand the role of the brain in creating flavor perception and in feeding. And one thing we're particularly interested in is trying to understand the modern food environment and how the modern food environment challenges our physiology in a new way. So the motivated brain circuits evolved for a much different food environment than the one we live in. And we're interested in trying to understand what it is about some of the processed foods that captures the motivated circuits and leads ultimately to overeating and obesity. So this is a picture of, let's turn around here, of the mock scanner in my lab. So this is a fake MRI machine. And the reason that we have it is, well, you can see it's a strange dining environment. And many of the regions of the brain that are important for taste and feeding are also the same regions of the brain that are important for feeling things in your stomach like anxiety, which you might feel if you lie on there and get inserted into the bore. So we do a lot of testing with our subjects before they actually go into the real scanner, just to make sure they feel comfortable. So you know, I often get teased by my colleagues that my lab looks a little bit like a kitchen. And I have some of the same things that Wylie has in his kitchen in my lab. These things here, this is an olfactometer. I spent my first year as a faculty member bidding on eBay for plumbing parts to try to figure out how to get small bursts of odors into a subject lying in an fMRI machine without letting the odor escape, because then the olfactory system would adapt. And so we devised this crazy machine where we have odors in these jars down here, and these different lines, and it's controlled with a computer. And essentially what happens is there's a constant stream of air to the subject, and when a valve is switched, one of the odors goes out, and it's held there until another signal happens, and then there's about a 2-3 second burst of odor embedded in a constant flow of air, and then that odorant is sniffed in by the subject, and then the system is flushed out. So that, very importantly for brain imaging, you can time lock when the subject's perceiving something with what's going on in their brain. And this thing right here measures sniffing. So we know exactly when it is they're taking in the odor. And this here, or here, is how we deliver taste and flavor. And so this is just some different flavored beverages here that we've created to actually not be very good. And they go through beverage tubes and then end in this thing here, a manifold. And so when one of the pumps turns on, a little bit of taste drips off onto the ball in the subject's mouth, and that's really how we measure the pleasure of feeding, which is clearly not a fine dining experience, but it allows us to have the necessary control over the stimulus delivery so that we can look exactly at the right time and point in space to determine how the brain is reacting to these stimuli.
So can you tell us more about what is taste and flavor?
Sure. So taste, or gustation, is a really simple sensory system, actually. When we say taste, colloquially, we generally mean flavor. Taste is really very simple. Here's a taste bud, and what happens is the mouth, and there's molecules and ions in the foods that we eat, and they bind to cells on these elongated taste receptors. And when enough binds, the cells get excited and they send a single signal to the brain that the brain then interprets as a taste. And so this is evidence then that the brain is taking this afferent information about the sensory world and doing something with it that will help us perceive what it is. So for flavor, the mouth is the receptive field. But there's a problem, and the problem comes in by the fact that flavor is what we call a proximal sense. You have to be in contact with it to sense it. And that means that the receptive field is on the spot where the food, the flavor, is touching the cells, the mouth. And so oral somatosensory receptors are all over the mouth. However, taste, in fact, is only in discrete spots on the tongue, so at the back, the side, and the tip. It's even worse for retronasal olfaction because this depends on volatiles escaping from the mouth when you're eating, and then they go up through the nasopharynx, and those volatiles come up, and they don't bind receptors in the mouth at all. Their receptors are up here in the nose. So taste evolved to detect the presence of nutrients and toxins. And when you're born knowing that you like sweet and dislike bitter. And that's good because you don't want to have to learn that sweet is energy and bitter is toxin. Having to learn that could be very perilous. So this is an innate affective response to a stimulus. Flavor, on the other hand, preferences and liking for flavors are entirely learned. And this has the advantage of allowing us to learn to like available energy sources and learn to avoid particular food items if they make us sick, for example. So I like to illustrate this with an anecdote from my own past. You probably all have similar stories. When you hear mine, you'll think of them. So in college, even in Canada, where we're so virtuous. You do some silly things, and my silly thing involved Malibu and 7-Up. So I don't know if you've had Malibu and 7-Up. It's a coconutty liqueur that's really sweet. It's really awful to me now, but it certainly doesn't taste like it's got much alcohol in it, but that's a ruse. There's a lot of alcohol in it, and I found that out the next morning where I was very ill. That was about 25 years ago, and since then, I have not had a Malibu and 7-Up. I can't even put on suntan lotion that has coconut smell in it. I have a very strong aversion. But over these past 25 years, I've continued to eat a lot of sweet things. So this is the role of flavor versus taste. The flavor allows us to identify a particular item that was associated with a particular consequence that we need to remember because it's important, whereas the taste provides just a signal about whether an energy source, in the case of sweet, is present. So that's the difference between taste and smell. And